Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. Armenia, a small landlocked country nestled in the rugged mountains of the South Caucasus, carries one of the most ancient religious identities in the world. In the year 301 AD, long before the Roman Empire had embraced Christianity, Armenia became the first nation in history to adopt Christianity as its state religion. For over 17 centuries, the Armenian Apostolic Church has stood not just as a faith, but as the core of Armenian identity, intertwined with its language, culture, and survival through centuries of conquest and exile. To be Armenian, for many, has long meant to be Christian. The two are almost inseparable, like body and soul. The church's stone monasteries cling to cliffs and mountainsides, silent witnesses to an unbroken faith that has endured Persian domination, Arab rule, Mongol invasions, Ottoman massacres, and Soviet atheism. Through it all, the church became more than a spiritual institution. It became the heart of a nation that refused to disappear. Yet today, in the 21st century, a quiet question echoes in the background. Can Islam exist in a country where Christianity defines what it means to be Armenian? This question isn't political. It's not about conversion or conflict. It's about identity and how faith adapts in places where history seems to have already written the script. Because while Armenia remains overwhelmingly Christian, Islam has also been part of this land's story, often hidden, sometimes erased, but never completely gone. Geographically, Armenia sits at the crossroads of civilizations and empires, bordered by Turkey to the west, Iran to the south, and Azerbaijan to the east. For centuries, these borders have been not only political, but spiritual boundaries. Between East and West, between Islam and Christianity, between empire and faith. In Yerevan, the capital, one can stand in the shadow of Mount Ararat, the biblical mountain where Noah's Ark is said to have rested, a symbol revered by Armenians, yet geographically located within Turkey's borders. This unique geography has shaped Armenia's destiny. It is a place where religions meet, collide, and influence one another, where Persian poets once mingled with Christian monks, and where Ottoman traders once built mosques next to churches. But in modern Armenia, Islam is almost invisible. Officially, Muslims make up less than 0.1% of the population, a few thousand people at most. Yet in recent years, that number has quietly begun to grow. New converts, foreign residents, and small communities of Iranian and Kurdish Muslims are reintroducing Islam into Armenia's social fabric. Still, this remains a sensitive topic. For some Armenians, Islam is associated with painful memories, especially the Armenian genocide of 1915, when Ottoman forces under a Muslim-majority empire killed over 1 million Armenians. That trauma lingers, casting a shadow on perceptions of Islam to this day. And yet, history is never just pain. Alongside suffering, there were also centuries of coexistence, moments when Muslims and Christians traded, learned, and lived side by side across the Caucasus. Many of those stories have been forgotten, buried under the weight of politics and memory. Today, as Armenia faces new challenges in 2025, political instability, economic hardship, and the aftermath of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which displaced tens of thousands, questions of identity and belonging are once again at the surface. In this atmosphere, a few Armenians have started rediscovering Islam not as an enemy, but as a spiritual alternative, a faith that speaks of patience, humility, and justice in times of loss. To understand Islam in Armenia today, we must first look back, more than 1,000 years, to the moment when the call to prayer first echoed across the valleys of the Caucasus. Islam arrived in the Armenian highlands in the 7th century during the early waves of Arab expansion following the rise of the Islamic Caliphate. At that time, Armenia was a patchwork of small kingdoms and principalities, Christian but politically fragmented, caught between two great powers, the Byzantine Empire to the west and the Sasanian Persian Empire to the east. Both empires claimed Armenia as a strategic frontier. When the armies of Islam swept across the region after the fall of Persia, Armenia became part of a new world, connected to Damascus, Baghdad, and the wider Islamic civilization. By 645 AD, the Arab Caliphate had secured control over much of Armenian territory. The region was incorporated into the administrative structure of the Umayyad and later Abbasid caliphates. Under Arab rule, Christianity was tolerated but regulated. Armenian nobles paid the jizya, a tax levied on non-Muslims, and in return were allowed to maintain their religion and local governance. In practice, this created a delicate balance, a kind of uneasy coexistence between the ruling Muslim elites and the Christian Armenian majority. Despite being under Islamic dominion for centuries, Armenia never fully converted. The Armenian Apostolic Church remained the center of life, identity, and resistance. The clergy preserved not only religious traditions but also the Armenian language, literature, and historical chronicles, vital in a time when assimilation seemed inevitable. This resilience became a defining feature of Armenian identity. Faith not just as belief, but as a form of survival. Still, Islamic influence left deep marks on Armenian soil. Under Arab and later Persian rule, new cities emerged along ancient trade routes connecting Baghdad, Tabriz, and Ani, the once glorious Armenian capital known as the City of 1001 Churches. Muslim merchants brought silk, spices, and scholarship, while Sufi mystics introduced new ideas about spirituality and the nature of God. The Armenian highlands became a meeting point of civilizations, where Christian monks and Muslim scholars occasionally shared the same marketplaces and manuscripts. From the 11th century onward, waves of Seljuk Turkic invasions reshaped the region. The Seljuks, Sunni Muslims, established control over much of the Caucasus, including parts of Armenia. They built mosques, caravanserais, and fortresses, traces of which still survive today in ruins scattered across eastern Armenia and the Nakhchivan region. Yet even during this period of Islamic dominance, the Armenian Church continued to function, sometimes taxed, sometimes suppressed, but never destroyed. By the 16th century, Armenia became a contested borderland between two great Muslim empires, the Ottoman Empire and Safavid Persia. For centuries, the two powers fought over the mountains of the Caucasus, dividing Armenian lands between them. Western Armenia fell under Ottoman rule, while Eastern Armenia was governed by the Persians. Each empire left its imprint, not only in politics, but in culture, language, and architecture. In Ottoman-controlled areas, Armenian craftsmen, merchants, and architects played vital roles in the empire's economy. Many Armenian towns had mosques and Armenian churches standing side by side, symbols of both proximity and separation. The Armenians were recognized as a dhimmi community, a protected but subordinate class under Islamic law. They were allowed to worship freely, but were excluded from political power and military service. This system produced both cooperation and resentment, a coexistence shaped by inequality but sustained by necessity. Under the Safavid Persians, a similar dynamic unfolded. Shah Abbas I, the powerful 17th century ruler, forcibly relocated tens of thousands of Armenians from the Caucasus to Iran, establishing the famous Armenian quarter of New Yulfa in Isfahan. There, Armenian merchants thrived under Persian protection, serving as cultural and economic bridges between the Islamic world and Christian Europe. Paradoxically, this displacement preserved Armenian culture, keeping it alive outside its homeland. Over these centuries, small numbers of Armenians did convert to Islam, mostly due to social or economic pressures or intermarriage. These converts were often absorbed into Turkish, Persian, or Kurdish identities, leaving little visible trace of their Armenian roots. Yet the influence of Islamic art, architecture, and even vocabulary subtly entered Armenian culture. Certain place names, architectural styles, and poetic forms still bear echoes of this contact. By the 19th century, as Russian forces advanced into the Caucasus and incorporated Eastern Armenia into the Russian Empire, centuries of Islamic rule gradually came to an end. The Muslim population, primarily Persians, Kurds, and Azeris, remained significant, but the political and cultural dominance of Islam faded. The Armenian Church once again rose as the central authority, now under Orthodox Christian imperial rule rather than Muslim governance. Despite this long and complex history, one thing stands out: Armenia's Christian identity never broke. It survived Arab taxation, Seljuk conquest, Persian deportation, and Ottoman domination. Through it all, Armenians saw Christianity not merely as faith, but as the soul of their nation, the one thing that could not be taken. Yet history also reveals that Islam was not merely an invader's religion. It was part of Armenia's story, a quiet undercurrent that connected the highlands to the vast networks of the Islamic world. The caravans that passed through Yerevan and Kars carried not only goods, but also ideas, shaping Armenia in ways often forgotten today. As we look to 2025, these ancient intersections between Islam and Armenia are resurfacing in unexpected ways. The past is no longer distant. It is being reinterpreted by a new generation that seeks to understand how a land so deeply rooted in Christianity can still bear the imprints of Islam, in its language, its art, and even in its silence. Because history, like faith, never truly disappears. It simply waits, beneath the stones of old mosques, in the ruins of forgotten caravanserais, and in the memory of a people whose story was always more diverse than it seemed. When Armenia became part of the Soviet Union in 1920, centuries of religious identity, both Christian and Muslim, were suddenly placed under the shadow of a new ideology: state atheism. The Soviet project sought to reshape not just the economy and politics of the region, but the very soul of its people. In Moscow's vision, religion was a relic of the past, a tool of oppression, ignorance, and division that needed to be erased to build a modern socialist society. For Armenia, a nation whose identity was built almost entirely around faith, this was a profound transformation. The Armenian Apostolic Church, once the heartbeat of national life, was systematically stripped of its power. Monasteries were closed, church properties confiscated, and priests imprisoned or executed. By the 1930s, the church had virtually disappeared from public life. Religious education was banned, crosses were taken down, public worship was replaced with parades, slogans, and portraits of Lenin. But Christianity was not the only faith to suffer. Islam too was silenced. The small Muslim communities that had once lived in Yerevan, Gyumri, and other towns were scattered or expelled, particularly during the conflicts and population exchanges of the early 20th century. Many mosques were destroyed, while others were repurposed as warehouses, offices, or cultural centers. The once vibrant Muslim presence that had existed under Persian and Ottoman rule faded almost completely from the Armenian landscape. By the 1950s, under Soviet control, religion existed only in whispers. Elderly women crossing themselves in secret before sleep. Families keeping old Qurans or Bibles hidden in drawers. A quiet, underground faith, personal, not public. Then came 1991. The collapse of the Soviet Union changed everything. Overnight, Armenia became an independent republic, free for the first time in 70 years. In that freedom, there was a spiritual hunger, a need to rediscover what it meant to be Armenian after decades of ideological silence. Across the country, churches were reopened and rebuilt. The Armenian Apostolic Church re-emerged not only as a spiritual institution, but as a powerful symbol of national revival. The church became inseparable from the state. its priests blessing soldiers, sanctifying parliaments, and guiding moral debates. In post-Soviet Armenia, to be Armenian once again meant, almost by default, to be Christian. Yet, in this powerful wave of Christian revival, Islam remained almost invisible. The tiny number of Muslims left in Armenia, mostly Iranians, Kurds, and a few local converts, had no real institutional support, no mosques, no community centers, and little public voice. For most Armenians, Islam was something that existed beyond the borders, in Turkey, in Iran, in Azerbaijan, not within their own society. During the Soviet decades, almost every mosque in Armenia was destroyed or repurposed. The exceptions were rare. Among the ruins and silence, one mosque survived, the Blue Mosque of Yerevan. Built in the 18th century during Persian rule, the Blue Mosque, or Gokjami, once served a thriving Muslim community in the heart of Yerevan. It was a masterpiece of Persian architecture, its turquoise domes glimmering in the sun, its walls adorned with intricate floral patterns, verses from the Quran inscribed in elegant calligraphy. But under Soviet rule, the mosque was stripped of its spiritual life. The call to prayer was silenced, and the building was converted into a museum of the city's history, a monument without meaning. After independence in the 1990s, the mosque was restored through cooperation between Armenia and Iran. Tehran funded the renovation, and in return, the Armenian government recognized the mosque as Iranian cultural property. Today, it stands as the only functioning mosque in Armenia, serving mainly the Iranian diplomatic and expatriate community. Inside its quiet courtyard, beneath the shadow of pomegranate trees, the contrast is striking. Outside its gates, Yerevan hums with the rhythm of a modern Christian nation, churches ringing their bells, crowds lighting candles at altars. Inside, a small group of Muslims bows in prayer, their voices echoing softly under the dome, a rare sound in a city where the church bell has long replaced the muezzin's call. The Blue Mosque is more than a building. It is a symbol of coexistence and, perhaps, of memory. It reminds Armenians that Islam is not foreign to their soil. It has been here before, for centuries. And though politics and history have tried to erase it, the mosque's blue tiles still shimmer like a quiet witness to a forgotten chapter of Armenia's past. Yet, the presence of the Blue Mosque is not without tension. In recent years, debates have resurfaced about the role of Islam in Armenian society, especially amid ongoing hostility with neighboring Azerbaijan and strained relations with Turkey. Many Armenians still associate Islam with geopolitical enemies, not with neighbors or fellow citizens. This perception has made it difficult for new Muslim converts or residents to express their faith openly. Still, there is change. Small, slow, but real. In 2025, as Armenia faces new challenges, from post-war recovery to mass emigration and economic uncertainty, younger generations are beginning to question the rigid boundaries of identity. Some see religion not as a national label, but as a personal journey. A few Armenians have quietly embraced Islam, drawn to its spirituality or ethical simplicity, often through contact with Iranian scholars or online Islamic content. For now, their numbers remain tiny, but their presence, like the Blue Mosque itself, carries symbolic weight, a sign that faith in Armenia, once crushed by empire and ideology, is again diversifying, in its own quiet way. The story of religion in post-Soviet Armenia is not one of conflict, but of rediscovery. After decades of enforced atheism, people are searching, some returning to the church of their ancestors, others finding meaning elsewhere. And somewhere in the heart of Yerevan, under the fading Persian tiles of the Blue Mosque, the centuries-old dialogue between Christianity and Islam continues, softly, persistently, as if reminding both faiths that even after empire, after war, and after silence, belief always finds a way to return. In 2025, Armenia stands as one of the most religiously homogeneous nations in the world, overwhelmingly Christian, with the Armenian Apostolic Church shaping much of the nation's cultural and political identity. And yet, amid this near-total religious unity, there exists a tiny but enduring Muslim presence, often unseen, seldom discussed, and rarely understood. Official estimates suggest that fewer than 1,000 Muslims live in Armenia today, roughly 0.02% of the population. Their number is so small that they barely appear in national statistics. There are no Islamic schools, no public calls to prayer, and no visible Muslim neighborhoods. But behind these quiet figures lies a mosaic of stories, fragments of history, migration, and individual faith that reveal a deeper, more nuanced picture of Islam in Armenia. The largest part of this small community consists of Iranian expatriates, diplomats, business people, students, and staff at the Iranian embassy in Yerevan. Their spiritual and cultural center is the Blue Mosque, which serves both as a functioning place of worship and a symbol of Iran's historical and cultural connection to Armenia. On Fridays, a few dozen worshippers gather in the mosque's courtyard for Jumu'ah prayers, their Persian voices rising softly under the dome, a faint echo of an Islamic presence that once stretched across the entire Caucasus. For these Iranians, Armenia is not a place of religious mission or conversion. It is simply a neighbor, a host nation, a quiet corner where they can live, study, and pray in peace. Their faith exists within diplomatic walls, not in the public sphere, respected but isolated. Beyond this Iranian enclave, there are also a few ethnic Kurds and Azeris who identify as Muslim. Many of them are remnants of older communities that once inhabited parts of Armenia before the population exchanges and wars of the early 20th century. However, after the Nagorno-Karabakh conflicts, most Azeri Muslims left Armenia, and those who remain tend to live discreetly, often concealing their background to avoid prejudice or political misunderstanding. Interestingly, the largest minority group in Armenia with cultural ties to the Islamic world are the Yazidis, an ethnically Kurdish people. Yet Yazidis are not Muslim. They follow an ancient monotheistic religion with its own sacred traditions. Ironically, because of linguistic and ethnic similarities, many outsiders mistake Yazidis for Muslims, a confusion that further blurs the perception of Islam in Armenia's public consciousness. And then there are the Armenian converts, a very small number, perhaps only a few dozen individuals nationwide, who have chosen to embrace Islam. Their stories are often deeply personal and complex. Some were drawn to Islam through academic curiosity, studying Persian or Arabic culture. Others found meaning in its spiritual discipline, its simplicity, or its emphasis on inner peace and submission to God. However, for most converts, practicing Islam in Armenia is an act of quiet conviction. Many face social stigma, not necessarily from hatred, but from misunderstanding. In a nation where Christianity is synonymous with national identity, converting to Islam can be seen as betraying one's roots. It challenges not only religious norms, but also the emotional and historical bonds that define what it means to be Armenian. To understand Islam in Armenia today, one cannot separate faith from the shadow of war. The events of the past 5 years, the renewed conflicts over Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 and the brief but intense escalation in 2023, have reshaped how Armenians view their region, their neighbors, and, inevitably, Islam itself. For centuries, Armenia's sense of identity has been tied to survival. Survival through empire, persecution, and exile. But the wars with Azerbaijan, a Muslim-majority country, and the historical trauma associated with Turkey, another Muslim-majority state, have deepened the lines between national and religious identity. In the public imagination, the concept of Muslim neighbor has become entangled with the memory of loss, occupation, and betrayal. When the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War broke out in 2020, Armenia suffered a devastating defeat. Thousands were killed and tens of thousands displaced. Many Armenians interpreted the conflict not just as a geopolitical struggle, but as a spiritual one, a Christian nation standing alone against a coalition of Muslim powers. Azerbaijan, supported militarily and politically by Turkey. In the years that followed, this perception hardened into a form of religious nationalism, where defending the Armenian homeland became synonymous with defending Christianity itself. By the time the 2023 border escalations occurred, brief but psychologically intense, this sentiment was already embedded in public consciousness. Islam, for many Armenians, became an abstraction shaped by war, not the personal faith of peaceful neighbors, but the symbol of an opposing civilization. In this atmosphere, the small Muslim minority inside Armenia found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They were not participants in the conflict, nor advocates of any political cause, yet they carried the burden of association. Many local converts to Islam described an increasing sense of social isolation, not open hostility, but subtle unease. Colleagues might ask intrusive questions. Landlords hesitate to rent apartments, or acquaintances express surprise, even confusion, that an Armenian could embrace Islam. In villages and smaller towns, it's often impossible to live openly as a Muslim. Religious practice remains confined to private homes or small gatherings, mostly in Yerevan, where anonymity offers a degree of protection. Outside the capital, there are no functioning mosques. The Blue Mosque in Yerevan remains the only recognized place of worship, primarily serving the Iranian community and a handful of Armenian converts. For Muslims in other regions, prayer is an intimate, hidden act, performed quietly, without visibility or recognition. This lack of space is not the result of government bans, but of social and cultural misunderstanding. Islam is still widely perceived through a political lens, associated with neighboring countries seen as hostile rather than as a spiritual tradition with its own diversity and peace-oriented teachings. And yet, amidst these tensions, there are signs of subtle change. Beginning around 2024, several local NGOs, cultural organizations, and academic institutions in Yerevan launched new interfaith dialogue initiatives. These small but significant efforts, often supported by European partners or universities, aim to rebuild trust, promote religious literacy, and challenge stereotypes that have lingered since the wars. One example is the Yerevan Center for Intercultural Understanding, which began hosting monthly roundtables bringing together Christian theologians, Iranian cultural representatives, and a few local Muslims. Their discussions about ethics, faith, and shared values have been modest, but meaningful. For many participants, it's the first time they have spoken face-to-face with someone from the other side of the religious divide. At the same time, a growing number of young Armenians, especially students in Yerevan, are starting to view Islam differently. Exposure to global media, travel, and online education has made them more curious than fearful. Many see Islam not as a political threat, but as another lens through which to understand the world, a religion that shares many moral and historical roots with their own. On social media, Armenian youth sometimes engage in discussions about Islamic philosophy, Persian poetry, or Sufi mysticism, topics that, even a decade ago, would have been taboo or misunderstood. This generational shift doesn't erase the pain of history or the realities of conflict, but it hints at a quiet evolution, a movement away from inherited prejudice toward cautious curiosity. In some ways, Armenia's young people are doing what the state cannot, rebuilding trust across invisible borders. Still, challenges remain profound. The scars of the Nagorno-Karabakh wars are fresh, and the geopolitical tension between Armenia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan continues to fuel suspicion. Any discussion of Islam risks being politicized or misinterpreted as sympathy for the enemy. In such a fragile environment, public expressions of Muslim identity remain rare. Yet, paradoxically, this very fragility has given birth to a new kind of faith, personal, reflective, and humble. The Muslims of Armenia, whether Iranian residents or Armenian converts, practice their religion without public recognition or institutional power. Their faith survives not through visibility, but through sincerity. In post-war Armenia, Islam is not a force of confrontation, but of quiet endurance. It stands as a reminder that even in lands marked by division, faith can still exist, stripped of politics, reduced to its essence, the search for peace, for purpose, and for connection with God. As Armenia moves further into 2025, the future of Islam in the country remains uncertain. But perhaps, in a society long defined by its suffering and resilience, there is space, however small, for empathy to grow. For now, Islam in Armenia lives softly, like a candle in the wind, fragile, flickering, yet somehow still burning, a testament not to power, but to perseverance. In early 2025, a strange wave of online content began circulating on social media platforms, particularly on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Telegram. Headlines in bold fonts proclaimed, "Armenians are converting to Islam in large numbers." Videos appeared showing men in traditional robes praying in mosques, or women in hijabs walking through narrow streets said to be in Yerevan. But almost none of it was real. Most of these clips were not filmed in Armenia at all. Some were from Iran, others from Azerbaijan or even Syria, edited together with misleading captions to spark outrage, confusion, or curiosity. Fact-checkers from regional media outlets like CivilNet and HTQ quickly debunked the claims, confirming that there has been no wave of conversions to Islam in Armenia. The number of Muslims in the country remains fewer than 1,000, including foreign residents, embassy staff, and a handful of Armenian converts who quietly practice their faith. So why did these rumors spread so widely and so fast? In today's digital ecosystem, misinformation often thrives at the intersection of fear and identity. For many Armenians, religion is not just belief, it's history, memory, and survival. After years of conflict with Muslim-majority neighbors like Azerbaijan and Turkey, the idea of Armenia turning Muslim hits a deep emotional chord. It triggers old anxieties about cultural erasure, invasion, and loss, even if those fears have no basis in fact. Meanwhile, on the other side, some online propagandists use such rumors to portray Armenia as a nation awakening to Islam, often as part of a geopolitical narrative. These narratives are amplified by algorithms that reward sensationalism, not truth. A dramatic headline, "The first Armenian mosque is full," travels faster than a careful report explaining that there's only one mosque in Yerevan, the historic Blue Mosque, mostly used by Iranian diplomats and visitors. Misinformation doesn't just distort perception, it shapes relationships. When Armenians see fake stories about conversions, some respond with fear or anger, while others with curiosity or sympathy. Both reactions, however, are based on illusion, not reality. And that's the danger of the 2025 misinformation wave. It replaces genuine interfaith understanding with viral noise. In a nation already struggling with post-war recovery, immigration, and political instability, digital propaganda adds another invisible front, the battle for truth. Yet, amid the noise, there's also a quiet resilience. Independent Armenian journalists, fact-checkers, and educators are beginning to fight back, launching digital literacy programs that teach young people how to identify fake content. At the same time, small interfaith circles in Yerevan use these online controversies as a starting point, not for division, but for dialogue, because at its heart, the question is not whether Armenians are becoming Muslim. The real question is whether Armenians, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, can protect truth in an era where lies travel faster than light. In a country where Christianity is not just a religion but a definition of national belonging, embracing Islam is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of quiet courage. Armenia's Muslim population today is small, almost invisible to the public eye. Yet behind the statistics are human lives, complex, reflective, and sincere. Each story begins differently, but they all share a common theme: the search for truth in a world that often discourages asking questions. Take, for instance, Arman, a philosophy lecturer at Yerevan State University. Raised in a traditional Christian family, he began exploring comparative religion while researching medieval Armenian scholars who had contact with Islamic thinkers. He was particularly struck by the writings of Ibn Sina and al-Farabi, philosophers who merged reason and faith in a way that resonated with him. For Arman, Islam offered a framework where intellect and spirituality coexisted, not in conflict, but in harmony. His conversion, however, was not public. He prays privately, fasts quietly during Ramadan, and keeps his new identity within a close circle of friends. As he once wrote in an online forum under a pseudonym, "Faith, when sincere, doesn't need applause, only understanding." Then there is Maryam, a young woman from the Armenian diaspora who grew up in France. Her story reflects a different journey, one of distance and return. While studying international relations in Paris, she met Muslim friends from Morocco and Senegal and was drawn to the discipline and serenity she saw in their prayers. After years of reflection, she embraced Islam, finding peace in its simplicity. When she moved back to Yerevan in 2024 to reconnect with her roots, she found herself between two worlds, an Armenian by heritage, a Muslim by heart. In public, she wears a simple scarf, not as a statement, but as a reminder of her commitment. She speaks softly about her choice. "I did not leave Armenia's faith. I simply found a way to speak to God that felt closer to me." Beyond local converts, Armenia's small Muslim community also includes Iranian residents, diplomats, students, and business people who call Yerevan home. For them, the Blue Mosque is not just a place of worship, it is a cultural bridge. During Friday prayers, one can hear Persian mingling with Armenian and sometimes Arabic, a quiet mosaic of identities coexisting in the same sacred space. For decades, the Blue Mosque has stood as a rare example of tolerance in the region, maintained with support from Iran, yet respected by the Armenian government as a heritage site. Life for Muslims in Armenia is not without its challenges. There are no Islamic schools, halal food is limited, and public awareness about Islam remains minimal. Yet most describe their experience not as hostile, but lonely, a solitude of faith rather than persecution. They navigate a subtle line between belonging to a deeply Christian nation and practicing a religion that is often misunderstood or politicized. Still, for those who have chosen this path, Islam in Armenia is not about numbers or visibility. It is about sincerity, a faith lived quietly, without noise, without agenda. They find strength in patience, dignity in silence, and meaning in the very act of believing when belief is rare. In a land where churches stand on every hill, a handful of Muslims bow in unseen corners, not to oppose but to coexist. Their story is not one of conflict but of conviction. A reminder that even in the oldest Christian nation in the world, faith still finds new forms, new faces, and new hearts willing to listen. In the heart of Yerevan, surrounded by modern cafes and fading Soviet apartment blocks, stands a quiet blue dome. Its tiles shimmer beneath the Armenian sun, adorned with Persian calligraphy and weathered floral motifs, reminders of an era when empires, not borders, shaped identity. This is the Blue Mosque, the only functioning mosque in all of Armenia. Built in 1766, during the rule of the Iranian Qajar dynasty, the mosque was once one of 8 Islamic houses of worship scattered across Yerevan. At that time, the city lay within a vast Persian cultural world, a crossroads where Armenian, Persian, and Turkic merchants met along the arteries of the Silk Road. Its name, Goy Masjid, or Blue Mosque, came from the turquoise tiles that once glowed across its dome, a hallmark of Iranian art and devotion. When Russia annexed eastern Armenia in the 19th century, much of the local Muslim population migrated eastward toward Persia. The mosque, once filled with life, gradually fell silent. And when the Soviet Union rose, faith itself became suspect. The Blue Mosque, like many sacred spaces under Soviet rule, was stripped of its spiritual role. Its minaret stood mute. Its courtyard, once filled with prayer, was turned into storage, and later into a museum display about a faith no longer allowed to breathe. But faith, even when silenced, endures. After Armenia regained independence in 1991, the Blue Mosque was restored, not merely as a relic, but as a living sanctuary. The restoration was carried out with the support of the Iranian government, a gesture of cultural diplomacy and mutual respect between two neighbors divided by history, yet bound by geography and shared memory. Today, in 2025, the Blue Mosque remains the only public Islamic space in Armenia. Every Friday, small groups of Muslims gather here: Iranian diplomats, students, travelers, and a few Armenian converts. Their voices rise softly under the dome, reciting verses in Persian and Arabic, blending with the faint hum of traffic from Yerevan's modern streets. To visitors, it feels like a living museum, a rare oasis of reflection amid the noise of a changing city. The mosque also serves as a cultural center, offering Persian language courses, art exhibits, and quiet lessons in diplomacy. It stands as more than a place of worship. It is a bridge between Armenia and Iran, between past and present, between faith and understanding. Yet beyond politics and architecture, the Blue Mosque tells a deeper story: the endurance of belief under constraint. It reflects Islam's presence in Armenia itself, visible yet fragile, respected yet often misunderstood, alive, though never dominant. For many Armenians, the mosque has become part of Yerevan's historical soul, not a foreign monument, but a shared memory of the city's layered past. For Muslims, it is a sanctuary of continuity, a place where the call to prayer has returned after centuries of silence. If you walk through its courtyard today, you'll see roses blooming beside ancient stone, a fountain murmuring softly at the center, and on its gate, the enduring words written in elegant calligraphy: "There is no God but Allah." These words, simple yet profound, carry across centuries, from the Qajar builders who raised these walls to the worshippers who now kneel beneath its dome. And perhaps that is the mosque's quiet miracle, that even in the world's oldest Christian nation, the voice of Islam still whispers, not in defiance, but in peace. A single mosque, standing as witness to time, reminding us that coexistence may be fragile, but it is real. In a land where every mountain carries a cross and every village is anchored by a church, to be Muslim in Armenia is to live faith in its quietest form. There are no crowds, no public calls to prayer, no minarets piercing the skyline. Only a handful of believers, praying in small rooms, behind unmarked doors, or within the blue dome that still stands in Yerevan. Here, Islam exists not as a movement, but as a memory, a soft echo of centuries when the faith once touched these valleys and traded along these roads. It survives not in the grandeur of institutions, but in the sincerity of those who hold it in their hearts. To be Muslim in Armenia is to believe without being seen, to practice without applause, and to hold on without expecting recognition. And yet, this quiet endurance carries a lesson, not only for Armenia, but for the world. In an age when religion is often measured by numbers, influence, or political weight, these small communities remind us of something deeper, that faith's truest power lies not in how many follow it, but in how steadfastly it survives. Armenia itself knows this truth better than most. For centuries, it fought to preserve its own Christian identity against empires far greater than itself: Persian, Ottoman, Russian, Soviet. It held on to faith not because it was easy, but because it was essential. That same resilience, the will to believe despite pressure, despite isolation, now mirrors the Muslim experience within its borders. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning of Armenia's story. That faith, whether Christian or Muslim, is not about dominance, but devotion. It is not about the noise of conversion, but the silence of conviction. It is not about where borders fall, but where belief endures. If one listens closely, beyond the bells and beyond the silence, there is a shared heartbeat of people who, despite history's divisions, continue to search for God in their own ways. In the world's oldest Christian nation, Islam survives, not through numbers, but through patience. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.